including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. We would like to acknowledge the lands and territories of the First Nations that you are all calling in from today. Before we begin the presentation, firstly, thank you for joining us. We can't believe, what is this, June 2023? My goodness, it's quite frightening how time is flying. And so a few little housekeeping items, and then I'll be introducing the speakers, and then we'll basically get right into it. And so before we begin the presentation, the session will be recorded for reference purposes for the future and for some of those folks who couldn't make this particular session. Because it's a short session, there will be no breaks. And, if you have questions as the speakers are presenting the information, please put it in the chat and we'll do our very best to make sure that we capture them. And the speakers will most likely try and answer them towards the end of their presentation, and or if it requires more time, at the end of the session in its entirety. After this particular webinar, you will be receiving a survey. So please make sure that you complete it so that it provides us a lot of insight on, constructive feedback and sort of how can we improve our sessions in the future, and what are the things that are important that are happening to you. And so pertaining to this webinar, the information that's going to be presented will be made available to you on our website. And so please, you don't need to start frantically writing down everything. And, take note, some of the areas that are really key that you need to be aware of. We will be providing certificate of attendance to participants for this webinar. We recognize that your time is valuable and very important, and whatever we can do to accredit and to support, your participation in our activities, we'll do our very best that you are recognized for that. So without further ado, I am absolutely delighted to introduce two very experienced, very wise speakers. As you can see that, we got the memo. We're all wearing white today, which is quite intriguing. Our first speaker is Stephen Simon, Manager of Client Services, Return to Work, Consultation and Education Services at WorkSafe BC. He is an extremely wealth of knowledge in the arena of health and safety, and brings a lot of expertise. And I'm not going to go too much into his background because some of you folks know, and you're most welcome to Google him as well. Our second esteemed speaker is Bill Dreyer, Director for the Reducing Poverty Initiative at the National Institute of Disability Management Research. They're doing some incredible work that is, in many cases groundbreaking, in the sense that there is a natural need to address this very important topic around disability management. He'll be presenting some really important resources that will be available to you. And I'm really excited to have these two gentlemen present to you this morning. Without further ado, Stephen, you have the baton. Thank you.
Thanks, Sat. And I'm just going to share my screen here and into presentation mode. And here we go. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about your industry, your sector, from the lens of WorkSafe BC and from the lens of return to work and the claim side of the business. I'm going to talk mainly about the why you should, why this matters, and why you should do something with respect to your return to work programs and your injury management programs. And Bill's going to talk a little more about the how. So I'm going to give a very quick overview on WorkSafe. Most of you know lots about us already. A bit around the community social services, again, from the lens of WorkSafe. Spend a bit of time on the life of the claim and the early intervention side of it, including just a quick hit on Bill 41, specifically Division 3.1, which is talking about the duty to cooperate around return to work. Quickly touch upon some of the WorkSafe resources, and then finish with a little bit of a call to action for your industry. So WorkSafe BC, we are an insurance company, but we are so much more than that. We're also responsible for the occupation health and safety regulations, the Workers' Compensation Act. So all of the health and safety, the prevention activity, the claims. I would encourage you that when you're interacting with our staff, both on the claims and on the prevention side, to recognize that their decisions they're all based in law and policy. So we're doing the best we can with the information that we receive from employers and workers, and applying our law and policy in those decisions. But part of WorkSafe BC is the insurance side of it. And before I get into some of the other information, I do want to quickly talk about our assessment process and the experience rating. And injury prevention and claims management and all the return to work activities, it can't just be about the money, right? It needs to be about the people that are involved, about preventing injuries and about best supporting workers in the event that they do have an injury. There is a financial impact on employers, and it's something to be aware of. Again, it's not about the money, but you should be aware of how this works. So our insurance system encourages employers to make better decisions and do a better job around injury prevention and return to work programs. And we have what we refer to as a base rate. And from that base rate, you can either be upwards of 50% below that insurance rate, or as much as 100% above that rate. So a surcharge. And just a very quick example here. Firm A, these are two companies that are in the same industry. They're doing the same work. Their base rate is both 1% of their total payroll, or $1 per $100 of payroll. One is receiving the maximum discount of 50%, meaning their net rate is 50 cents per $100 of payroll. And the other company doing the same work has 100% surcharge. Their safety record, their volume of claims and the duration of their claims is such that they're getting the maximum surcharge. So they're not paying $1 per $100 of payroll. They're paying the maximum $2 per $100 of payroll for that industry sector. And each industry sector has its own insurance rate, ranging from less than 30 cents to upwards of $10 per $100 of payroll. In this case, if they both had a payroll of $1 million, one would be paying $5,000 in insurance premiums annually, and the other would be paying $1,000. So there's a good incentive on the financial side to ensure that your health and safety, your injury prevention, and your return to work program are performing well for you in your sector. So very quickly, community social services. Within the WorkSafe world, there's 3 classification units that we typically include when we talk about community social services. And it's counseling, life job skills, and residential social services. Residential social services is by far the biggest and the area that influences the numbers the greatest. But very quickly, time loss claims. So these are injuries where someone has had to lose time at work, and the volume of these claims has consistently gone up from 2018 to 2020. I will say that 2022, from 18 to 22, the numbers in 2022, part of the increase is due to an influx of COVID claims. You can also see that your industry has grown from almost 40,000 workers, what we refer to as person years, up to over 45,000. And the injury rate is the number of time loss claims per 100 workers. And this has also been increasing. You can expect it to increase in 2022. Those numbers aren't finalized yet, but it's upwards now of about 4 injuries per 100 workers. The provincial norm, the provincial average, is around 2 injuries per 100 workers. Along with that, we look at how you perform on the return to work side. So how many workers are back in 4 weeks? How many are back in 26 weeks? And what's the duration? And in this case, the duration being what's referred to as the 6-month truncated duration, where it removes any sort of outliers that could be adversely influencing the overall duration. You can see that duration has gone up from 35 to 42 to 43 days per injury, and that in 2022 it came down to 38. The increase in the volume of claims and the decrease in the duration are both heavily influenced by COVID. So I don't want to give the impression that the industry experienced a lot more injuries and is performing poorly, or that the industry is performing well on the duration side. Both those numbers are influenced by COVID. And so there's a bit of noise in the data. On the cost side of it, and the days lost have gone from around 50,000 to over 100,000, and the claims cost from 13 million to 35 million. It's worth noting that in the $35 million for 2022, that around a third of those dollars are due to new injuries that occurred in 2022. The rest of the costs are coming forward from older claims that occurred in 2021 and 2020, and have still not returned to work, and are having costs come forward from previous years. And finally, you can see that your payroll has increased. So part of the increase in the days lost, part of the increase in the time lost claims has been driven from growth in the industry. And along with that, your assessment amount has increased from 24 million to up to almost 60 million to $59 million. Part of those costs, again, are driven from a growth in the industry, but part of it's also from an increased duration. So when we look at your sector, at community social services, none of this should probably be a surprise, right? Acts of violence or acting out behavior, reactive behavior on part of the clients is a major source of injuries. Overexertion, falls are the other. And you can see exposure to toxic substance, that's where the COVID claims would come into play. It's worth noting that the acts of violence is resulting in 25% of the volume, but it's resulting in 40% of the claims cost. So these are more costly claims than typical. And as I mentioned, in 2022, volume of claims from COVID was around 6%, but their impact on the cost was around 4%. And it's worth noting for employers that these costs, the COVID costs, are not going to be charged back to employers. It's going to be charged back to the accident fund, shared liability around the COVID experience. When we look at the nature of injuries, so these are sprains and strains and contusions and concussions. Again, we have the respiratory and inflammation. We also have mental health issues, mental disorders. Sprains, strains are by far the most common types of injuries, nature of injury that you're having. The 11% of mental health disorders is overrepresented in costs. So they're a small percentage, or not about 1 in 10 of your claims are related to mental health, but 4 in $10 are related to mental health. This is an area in which we need to, all of us collectively, need to get a better handle on how we can support workers with mental health claims. You can see that the cost for mental health claims have gone from 2.8 million in 2018 to over 15 million in 2022. Again, not a surprise to the people in the audience. People are the source of injury. So in this case, your clients are for the most part, the primary source of time loss claims, 40% of the volume, 60% of the costs, the occupation, community social service workers, and the age of injured workers. Almost 50% and over 50% of the costs of injuries are occurring to workers over the age of 45. I would strongly encourage you to consider, how are you going to support these mature workers in their injury prevention and in their early and safe return to work. What's required for that workforce is different than younger workers. Chances are these individuals have had a prior claim, a prior injury, and the return to work does not need to be longer. It is. It does not need to be. We just need to find out a better way to connect with them, support them, keep them connected to the workplace. And finally, all these numbers are fairly close to the provincial average, the number of protests on the initial claim. And I would discourage you from being overactive on claim protests. It delays decisions on our side. It delays the return to work and typically results in a more costly claim. Right now, around 12% of the claims have a protest on them. Some employers are around 1 in 3 claims, 50% of the claims, the protests. And I can tell you, it's just not that helpful. I'm not suggesting that you don't put a protest on claims. I would just encourage you to be quite selective as to how you go about that. Timeliness on Form 7, and this is a bit of an issue for me. The BC average is 8 days to see 50% of the claims be submitted to WorkSafe BC. Your industry is 6 days, so it's a little better than the provincial average. But that means for 50% of the claims, they're taking longer than 6 days for the employer to tell us about a workplace injury. The legal requirement, the legislative requirement is 72 hours. And in this situation, timeliness matters. The sooner you get us the information, the better decision we can make, and the sooner we can make that decision. The other point of concern is how the information is coming to us. And only around 50% of the Form 7s, this is the employer notice of injury to WorkSafe BC, 50% are coming through the employer portal, which means the other 50% are coming in some sort of other manner. Is that through mail or fax? I don't know, but it's not a particularly efficient way of doing it. And I would encourage you to make better use of the employer portal. And on that front, I would strongly encourage you to know your numbers. Through your employer portal, you have access to information around your insurance, health and safety, and claims. One of those is through the Employer Health and Safety Planning Toolkit. Tremendous information in there that can help you make better decisions about what you prioritize for injury prevention and where you place your resources, injury management side of things on the return to work. So take the time to figure out your employer portal and what it offers you. So life of the claim and early intervention. And Bill's going to pick up on this in his presentation and give you more details on some of the how side of it. But very quickly off of this first slide, some of these key words: a proactive approach, keeping workers connected with the workplace, safe and timely return to work, and most importantly, that your job starts at the time of injury on the return to work side. Not once the forms are in and the rest of it, but for the supervisor and that injured worker, the job starts at the time of the injury. There are all kinds of financial benefits to the employer. It is worth noting that your direct costs, the costs of medical and the cost of wage loss, that the true cost of the claim tends to be 4 to 5 times greater than those direct costs. So I can tell you what your wage loss benefits are and what the medical costs are, but the true cost to you is 4 to 5 times greater than that. I'm going to talk a little more later on about the impact on the employee, but it's worth noting that their health, their mental well-being, their connection to their community and to the workplace is greatly compromised by being off of work on a workplace injury. We have what we call the waiting game. Workers are waiting to get in to see their doctor. WorkSafe BC is waiting for the forms to come in. Employers are waiting to hear whether or not the claim's been accepted and what do I do next on that. Sometimes employers are waiting to hear from the worker that they've in fact had a workplace injury. With that waiting, there's lots of finger pointing. And if I can encourage one thing from today, please stop waiting. Act at the time of the injury with your worker, with your supervisor. Start on the process early. Don't wait for the insurer to hear back from them. Just start on the process as soon as you are aware of. This is what happens on the WorkSafe side. We collect forms from workers, employers, healthcare providers. We assemble all that information. We make a decision and we may determine how much the wages go out. It takes us, in a good case scenario, about 8 to 10 days to make that decision. On average, it takes us 18 to 20 days. And again, you can be active in those early days without information from the insurer. While we collect information and we do what's required on our side, you can be active in the return to work in the absence of the information or any feedback from the insurer itself, working directly with that injured worker. The first 4 weeks is critical. Right now in your industry, around 50 to 60% of the injured workers return within the first 4 weeks. And it improves in the percentage returning to work at 12 weeks and 26 weeks. But those first 4 weeks are critical to both the recovery of that worker and their connection to the workplace, and avoiding complications of secondary issues primarily related to their mental health and their overall well-being. And if that doesn't help, there is new work from coming out of a physician out of Washington State, and his work is suggesting that anyone who is away from work for longer than 4 weeks is a medical emergency. Worklessness is a medical emergency. Some of the work that's being done in that area is pointing to mortality risks, and your mortality risk for being unemployed is greater than obesity, smoking, hypertension, poverty, diabetes. It is critical that we keep these workers connected to the workplace, that we keep them in a positive environment with their contributions, both to their workplace, their community, and to their home. And if that's not convincing you to act in those early days, we have new legislation that has been passed and will come into force in January of 2024. So Bill 41 was passed in November of 2022. This division, this section of it, Division 3.1, will come into force in January of 2024. And it is encouraging, it's not encouraging, it is requiring employers and workers to cooperate in the worker's early and safe return to work or continuation of work by doing the following: contacting the other party as soon as possible, identifying suitable work that worker that restores the full wages and their earnings to their pre-injury state, and providing the board with that information. You won't see mention of physicians, physios, other medical practitioners, diagnostic imaging. This is about a worker, an injured worker, and their supervisor and their workplace coming up with a plan to get them back to work and to restore them to their full physical well-being and their full earnings. The other part of this bill, and I'm not going to get into it at this time, but is the duty to maintain employment. And it's very similar to what we've all experienced in the past with duty to accommodate, very similar requirements around that. But all of that should be encouraging to act as soon as possible. Employer and worker working together as soon as possible in that worker's early return to work, recovery at work. Resources. WorkSafe BC has a tremendous amount of resources on all aspects of our business. Some of it you can access directly through the website, and others you can access through the employer portal, through that secure portal. There is information specific to recover and work. That's where all the return to work information is. Specific forms that you can utilize for your work site, a starter kit, information that can help you with determining modified duties in the early stages. And Bill's going to give you a lot more information around some other tools and resources outside of WorkSafe BC. Additionally, there is the My Department, Return to Work Consultation and Education services. Some of these self-help tools have been developed by my group. We also are the area that promotes early access to physiotherapy. And there is an employer return to work support line and email. This is not for injured workers. This is for employers to reach out and ask questions about the process and for us to help you navigate system and best practices with respect to return to work, recover at work. Additionally, we do all kinds of employer outreach, and it ranges from short-term interventions to education and training, along with what are referred to employer engagement. So more of a deeper dive into what your current program is and what might be done to improve that. And with that, the call to action. Support your injured workers, get them safe and cared for, offer modified duties, recover at work, return to work opportunities, and do that as soon as possible. As I said, it starts at the time of the incident. Investigate the incident, determine what corrective actions can be done, and submit the paperwork. At the end of the day, there's an element of WorkSafe BC that is an insurance company. And I guarantee you, if you were in a motor vehicle incident and your car was totaled, you wouldn't wait 3 weeks to tell the insurance company about it. For your injured workers, we are their insurance company. Communicate with your injured workers and get them to call their insurer, get them to call teleclaim on the day of the incident. The recover at work and safe and timely return to work are good for the worker, for the community, for your business. And your job starts day one. Don't wait for the insurer for you to act. Again, you need to be as proactive as possible and act as soon as possible in the event of an injury. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Sat, is there any questions? I flew through that pretty quick. I want to try and give lots of time for questions and for Bill's presentation. Sat, are there any questions that you feel is appropriate to address at this stage?
Firstly, thank you for your presentation. It was excellent. There's a lot of information in there, and I'm glad that we're going to make that available to everybody who's participating and the sector in general. I don't see any questions at this point. However, I think the big takeaways here is that, we're nonprofit organizations or organizations that are supporting folks, in community social services. We're literally doing everything that we can off the side of our desks. And we're quickly realizing that, we've, traditionally have been a training ground for education, healthcare, and governments. And so, we're constantly, revolving people all the time. And I think, having a robust health and safety management system is key. Having a disability management process that's cohesive is really critical, especially in this day and age now more than ever. And I think, Stephen, your points are really important and vital. The mortality rate in comparison for injured workers, that just frightens me. I had no idea that was the situation. The impact of Bill 41, where, employers, workers, need to be very mindful and be very cohesive around sort of, what happens. I would even dare say when you're hiring employees, in your orientation process, share with them your policies and processes, provide them, all that information so that they already know that, hey, we have a system in place and that it's really important that we engage employees in that manner. And also for, some organizations, a majority of organizations, I'd probably say more the larger ones that have 50 plus employees, have a disability management structure or a third party benefit provider. And so it's really important that, employers really engage your third party benefit provider in the disability management function. And I know Bill's like shaking his head because he understands that stuff very intimately, and rightly so. But really it's about fine tuning what we're doing and trying to, really, move the ball forward. But that being said, we do have a few questions here.
Yeah, there is a question there. And just on your comments, the third party providers can provide an excellent service. It still does not remove the requirement for employers, supervisors, workers to be active on the day of the incident. The third party provider might get involved sooner than WorkSafe BC because they're not collecting information to make a decision the same way that we are, but they still are not there. They're not in the workplace. They're not there at the time of the incident. So third party does not remove that requirement for workers and supervisor to be active at the time of the incident. And I think I would just like to echo your comment around the system approach because of staff turnover. And the complexity of your industry. If this is just being done off the side of someone's desk and being done based on the goodwill of others, when that individual leaves, your program leaves with them. So you do need a systems approach for it. So it's embedded within the workplace itself. So first question, Sat, that I'm seeing here is how to manage the return to work and keeping in touch with injured workers when it's related to mental health. And unless that mental health issue is because of a relationship with a coworker or their supervisor, something related to bullying, harassment, or that their stress, anxiety, depression is related to that working relationship, the employer should still be keeping in touch with them on a regular basis. Just because it's mental health doesn't mean that we shouldn't be contacting workers. And it's not about saying, hey, when are you coming back to work? It's about how are you? And what can we do? And here's what we have with respect to modified duties, alternate duties. You need to be doing it the same way as you would with physical injuries and contacting them and staying in touch with them and looking for opportunities to keep them connected to the workplace. And it's even more critical that you do it with mental health claims because our decision process is longer. It takes longer. It's 40, 50, 60 days for a decision for a mental health claim, not the 8, 10 or provincial average of 18 to 20. So it's even more critical that you stay in touch with them. The next question is, we struggle with getting employees to submit claims in a timely manner.
Great question.
It is their legal responsibility to do so. And if they don't show up to work, or if they don't show up to work on time, I'm positive you have consequences in place for someone who is constantly late for work. If they are not filling out their incident forms in a timely manner and informing you, there needs to be consequences. I would encourage you first to be curious and kind with respect to inquiring why they're not doing it, but ultimately it's a performance issue. Vast majority of health and safety responsibilities fall to the employer and the supervisor. But on the worker front, their responsibility is to identify health and safety issues, notify their supervisor as soon as possible, and in the event of an injury, unless they are being carried away in an ambulance, inform their supervisor, go to first aid, seek additional medical if that's what's required, and call the insurance company, call teleclaim. But they should not be leaving the work site without telling their supervisor that there has been an unsafe condition and it's resulted in an injury. That is on employers to manage that the workforce, the same as you do with your standards of care, with your timeliness for hours worked, all of that. But I would start with the communication out to staff, telling them this is what we are responsible for as the employer, and this is what the health and safety committee is responsible for, and this is what workers are responsible for in the return to work process. And SAT is correct. Take that communication opportunity to tell them about their injury management policy, their return to work, their recover at work policy. The next question is, GRTW with mental health injuries are very difficult to deal with, as many times employees refusing to work with individuals carrying aggressive behavior. I don't have, there is no easy answer to this. You saw the statistics. You have reactive behavior acting out behavior from some of your clients, not all of your clients. It's resulting in a large number of claims and very costly claims. And I would suggest is the main driver behind some of the mental health claims that we have. And you're in a difficult situation, right? Again, there's no quick fix to it. But I would encourage you to look at your work environment, and not all clients have aggressive behavior, acting out behavior. Not all work environments are as stressful as others. And we're not looking at a long-term duty to accommodate. We're looking at a way to get someone who has triggers with respect to the work environment, finding a less stressful environment, and gradually introducing them back into the work in which they presumably enjoy doing, right? They got into this work for a particular reason. How can we get them back there? WorkSafe BC makes use of community occupational therapists, and they've been excellent with respect to integrating people back into the community, the work environment, and the more challenging work. But it is a gradual process. And you need to find modified duties, alternate duties that avoid some of those stressful environments that allow them to come back in a more gradual manner. Sat, those are the questions that we have for now. If there's others at the end, I'm happy to do so, but I'd like to turn it over to you and Bill. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you very much. Just a little comment to just add to kind of the comments that were shared earlier by Stephen around, Raphael, great questions, by the way. Any suggestions on managing the RTW? Really, it depends on the nature of your service, okay? You really you try, if you can, to be as, doing an environmental scan in your risk assessment process. That will help you somewhat build in mechanisms. It's not going to happen right away. It's just going to take time, whether it's a harm reduction organization, whether it's an immigrant service organization, whether it's a community living organization. Think about the occupational competencies and what the exposure risk is, if that's of any support. Look at, the other item, Kate, absolutely what kind of wording, looking at your policy, really educating your staff, working with your Josh committee as well, building that kind of culture by stating, hey, this is really important. This is in the best effort of everybody, mostly the injured worker, to support them. And as for mental health and managing aggressive behaviors, again, just sort of going back to, what's the nature of the work that you're doing? And, I would encourage for you to look at your your employer health and safety portal. Like, look at your profile, look at the trending from the past and currently, and see if you can create some sort of understanding of the type of injuries related to violence and mental health. And you may be able to draw a picture, okay? And review that and try and analyze it to the best of your abilities, and get subject matter experts involved in that process, because this is something that's really critical. And I know that the association, we take this very, very seriously, and we're really working hard to work with our sector workers and employers to really figure out strategies to support our industry. That being said, great questions. Thank you again, Stephen. I'm very pleased to pass the baton to torch, I guess, to Bill Dyer. So thank you, and it's all yours, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sat, and thank you for your presentation, Stephen. And I hope to dovetail into it. First things first is I'm going to open mine. Hopefully there'll be no catastrophe here. Okay, are we good, Sat?
No, not yet.
You can't see it?
Yeah, no, I don't see. I don't know if Steve has passed on the permissions. Let's just see here.
Yeah, I've stopped sharing, so
hold sec here.
so Bill should be okay.
Maybe if I hit the share button, it might help. Huh?
There you go.
Okay, there we go.
There you go. You're
There
good
it's
to
coming
go.
up.
Okay, am I good to go now?
Go.
Awesome, awesome.
All righty,
So,
thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. For the folks on the phone or taking part in this webinar, if you don't know me, I kind of jump around a fair bit, but I do want you to know that I work for a nonprofit organization. We don't bill by the hour. In fact, we don't bill at all. So whether it be today, tomorrow, 6 months from now, you're scratching your head and wondering what I talked about, and are seeking further information and insight, feel free just to reach out to me, okay? Now, I have a couple comments just building on top of what Stephen, through his presentation, mentioned, and some of the things that kind of dovetail into my part of the equation. Number one, there are a number of things coming down the pipe. We all know about Bill 41 with regard to the WorkSafe BC Act, because that's kind of fresh, it's new. In addition to that, there's also Bill 6, the Accessible BC Act, that's also coming down the pipe. Presently, it is more engaging of crown corporations, municipalities, so on and so forth. However, if you have not received your letter yet from the government with regard to your accessibility plan going forward, you soon will be in the next year. There's also the Accessible Canada Act, which again, similar to the Accessible BC Act, is starting with federally regulated organizations in transportation and communication. And the game plan is that it will also flow downhill and eventually land on your doorstep. What does that mean? Well, what it means is you're going to need to have a plan within your workplace, a written plan, if you will, with regard to your organization, facility being accessible. And we're not talking about just having, ramps and doorways that are accessible to people within wheelchairs and such, but completely accessible to all people, race, creed, or color, so to speak. But as well as that, accessible to people with disabilities that may well become injured or ill within your workplace, or people that have never had the opportunity to participate in gainful employment because of their limitations, disabilities, and such. Okay. Another component here, which I think is very critical, is that, as Stephen mentioned a number of times in his presentation, that supervisors are important. With regard to the disability management process, supervisors are the most critical stakeholder over and above the injured worker themselves. Supervisors have the direct contact. They're the person that worker identifies with and works with on a daily basis. So consequently, they are the most critical person. Research has actually been done on this and supports the fact that the supervisor is the key, the gatekeeper, the most critical individual. The next point I wanted to mention that kind of dovetails again into Steve's presentation is third-party providers. And I know and respect that probably 99% of the people on the phone do have third-party providers involved in their disability management programming. And when I say that, I'm talking about disability management being not only occupational injuries, but also non-occupational injuries and illnesses. And I respect that most of you have third-party providers assisting you with regard to your disability management portfolio, but it's incumbent and important that your process dovetails in with their process, okay? You're not operating on islands here. You should all be working hand in hand with respect to injuries and illnesses that take place in your workplace or outside of your workplace. And the last comment on that before I get into my presentation is that each and every one of your workplaces is slightly different than your colleagues or competitors down the road. And that needs to be taken into consideration. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So at any rate, I'm with the National Institute of Disability Management and Research. I've been there now for approximately 2.5 years, albeit I started my relationship with NEDMAR back in the mid-90s. Back in those days, I was working for ICBC. ICBC was one of the founding supporters of NEDMAR. Consequently, I did a whole battery of education through NEDMAR, and from that day forward, have been fairly deep in the world of disability management. I've come full circle, which I'll talk about a bit later, and jump back on board with NEDMAR with both feet. So what I'm going to talk about today is a bit of an introduction, which we've kind of touched on. I'm going to talk a little bit more about NEDMAR. I'm going to talk about the numbers and what they speak to. It's building on the numbers in which Stephen alluded to. I'm going to talk about disability management context. I'm going to talk about best practices. Then I'm going to get into creating your own disability management program, then touching on some resources and questions and answers. A lot of stuff. I can talk about this for about 2 or 3 days. So we're going to go on a bit of a whirlwind journey here. And please note that I'm available and accessible at any point in time today or thereafter. So just a little bit about NEDMAR, and I respect that everyone's going to get a copy of this presentation, so I don't necessarily need to hit every bullet that's in front of us right now, but I'm going to hit a couple of key bullets. NEDMAR in itself, the National Institute of Disability Management Research, was created back in 1995, okay? It was created in 95, and it was actually created by the Disabled Forest Workers Foundation. The Disabled Forest Workers Foundation came to be back in the 80s as a direct result of 2 forest workers that had catastrophic injuries working for McMillan Bloedel back in the 70s in Port Alberni in the Kennedy Lake Division of McMillan Bloedel. Both of them suffered catastrophic injuries in the sense that Wolfgang Zimmermann, the current executive director, fell a tree and regrettably kicked back on him. And from that point forward, he was a paraplegic. The other gentleman, Sven Fredriksson, who regrettably has passed away in the last number of years, was again falling a tree out in the woods. A large branch from way up high came falling down, hit him on the side of his hard hat, and regrettably, he was a quadriplegic from that point forward. Both of them wanted to return to gainful employment. Back in those days, McMillan Bloedel, nor did any organization for that matter that I know of, had a disability management program in place, albeit they wanted to be retrained and returned to work. It took them a number of years, took a number of supporters to assist them in the process, but both of them were retrained to return to work, at which point they both felt there was a lot of other disabled forest workers out there. Consequently, they created the Disabled Forest Workers Foundation, got quite a following, which then led into the National Institute of Disability Management Research. When NEDMAR was created, they in turn went forward and created the first occupational standards in disability management, following the Government of Canada guidelines, which were published way back in 1999. Through an agreement with the ILO, they created the first code of practice in disability management, which was then created, implemented, and put forth in 2002. Following upon that, they created the first professional standards in occupational standards, that is, in creating the examination and certified body of a certified disability management professional. Going forward, they then created the International Disability Management Standards Council, which is now recognized in 45 countries around the world. Following that, and in 2013, they created the Pacific Coast University, which provides a number of educational opportunities in disability management, mental health, as well as some advanced opportunities in education around disability management. So I tell you all this because NEDMAR in itself came from disabled and injured workers in British Columbia, in Port Alberni, and now this organization and the standards and education and certification in which it's created is recognized in multiple jurisdictions around the world. Okay, so how the numbers speak to us across Canada annually, there's roughly 251,000 occupational lost time claims. Flowing from that, there's roughly 951 fatalities from workplace-related accidents and occupational injuries. The cost of disability and related absences is up in the neighborhood of $16 billion annually in Canada. Now, these numbers, as you can see, are getting a little old, being they reflect back to, as far back as 2014, okay? We all know, and I think it was talked about within Stephen's conversation, that, you know, mental health claims are definitely on the rise. I remember when I first started in this industry, you know, it was musculoskeletal injuries for the drivers of the bus. Well, you know, mental health cases now are at par, if not passing, musculoskeletal injuries. We can say that at any given week in time, there's at least 500,000 employed Canadians are unable to work due to mental health problems. The economic burden of mental health illness in Canada is estimated to be $51 billion each year. And it's terrible to say that nearly 4,000 Canadians die by suicide each year, on average 11 people per day. Not acceptable at all, not. And again, looking at the numbers, we can say that across Canada, roughly 53% of Canadians are living with episodic disability. Now, episodic disability are things such as diabetes, chronic pain, anxiety, epilepsy, arthritis, Crohn's, migraines, MS, substance use, and now long COVID. We see this, and you see this, I'm sure, within your workplaces. We also know through research and multiple research that the longer someone's away from work, the odds of them returning to work start to diminish. If someone doesn't return to work within 6 months, it's 55% chance, you know, they're not going to. Of course, after a year, it's dropped down significantly. After 2 years, it's even further. So disability management, I think we all believe we know what it is. In my terms, disability management not only looks at occupational, but non-occupational illnesses and injuries, and works with the injured worker, the workplace, any other stakeholders in the process to create that path, if you will, to keep that worker in the workplace or to restore them back to the workplace as soon, as respectful, and as meaningful as possible. Now, what can we achieve with effective disability management? The critical factors are keeping that worker in the workplace, reducing the mental health and anxiety, keeping knowledgeable workers within your workplace, and that whole reduced labor force availability, I think, that a lot of our organizations are going through right now. We want to keep the people in the workplace. We want to keep the structure going. Now, disability management itself by the numbers, okay, and the one critical number I really look at here is that every dollar spent will save $5. So that's every dollar spent with regard to mechanisms, devices, strategies to keep an ill or injured worker in the workplace. That could be modified work, graduated return to work, supernumerary. It could be a lot of things. It also reduces the insurance costs, whether it be your WCB premiums and or whether it be your short-term, long-term disability premiums. It also saves the impact to coworkers within the workplace. Now, what are some of the key challenges that I think we all can embrace and understand and have probably seen and endured that are challenges to effective disability management, or at least influence disability management, are, you know, workers with low job satisfaction, lack of return to work support, exposure to violence and bullying in the workplace, lack of accommodation, the whole stigma around mental health in the workplace, lack of communication, lack of graduated phase return to work, and in some cases, the actual benefits design within the workplace. Now, back in, and I gotta put my glasses on for this one, okay? there was actually a 9-country study done, and this was done back in 2008. Okay, this 9-country study was performed actually between 1996 and 1998 under the auspices of the ILO in Geneva. It involved Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Canada, Germany, the Netherlands, the UK, Denmark, and Sweden. And what they looked at in those 9 countries back in 1996 to 1998 were, what are the common success factors for organizations that had effective disability management programs in place. Okay. Through this study, they managed to isolate 13 key indicators as to what the organizations that had best outcome disability management programs in place. These are those 13 indicators. Okay. Injury prevention and safety programs, health promotion and wellness programs, some form of early intervention combined with formal return to work programs. They all effectively had policies and processes in place. And those policies and processes they had in place were created and jointly endorsed by labor and management within those respective organizations. They had benefit program designs that supported early intervention and disability management programming. They had internal and external communication systems in place. Everyone was aware as to what was going on and what the steps were. There was education. There was actually transitional work options available ahead of need. So they had what we call as a job jar as to, okay, we know we have people with either mental health injuries, back injuries, knee injuries. We know we're going to get these injuries. So let's think about it in advance. So we thought it through. We have a job jar. We have some options available, some strategies. They also had a place, or shall we say, a protocol and a process spelled out with regard to workplace accommodations. So again, it was documented, it was a process, it was a flow. Everyone knew what it was and what it looked like. There was also identification of key workplace personnel. So granted, people in the organization knew how it flowed, they knew the process, they knew the steps, but there was also some key personnel within the organization that were the go-to champions, okay? There was also accountability in the sense, hey, there's a process, everyone has their responsibilities in that process, and you know what? There's some accountabilities here. There was some regulations, okay, within those specific countries with regard to supporting accommodation, return to work programming, and those organizations had a supportive culture in place. They supported disability management. So these are the 13 elements out of that 9-country study way back in 1996 to 1998 that was performed. What NIDMAR did is we took these 13 elements from this 9-country study, created best practices in disability management, okay? And what we did is we took those 13 elements and we built on them. So now we have 16 elements of a best practice disability management program and what those elements should be. Now, those 3 additional elements that were added into the process were around wellness and around data management and cost benefit analysis, okay? So I'm just going to walk through these best practice elements because where I want to get to is a conversation as to what you may wish to consider within your organization as to how do I create a disability management program? Or, gee, how do I enhance the program I have in place now? And respecting the fact that every organization is different. Every organization is at a different juncture in that journey, as it be whether or not they're just at the point of starting a program, or are they well on their way down the road where they're looking to enhance their program? Is their program an internal program? Is their program an external program? Or is their program a hybrid program where some of it's in-house and some of it's external with a third-party provider. There's a number of options here, but albeit there might be a number of options, you still need to be cognizant, aware of all 16 elements of a best practice program to be able to be maximizing your opportunities within the workplace. And not to forget, every representative of workplace or a union or what have you that's on the phone, even though you might have a third party performing your disability management services, as an employer, as an organization, as a union, you can't just advocate the responsibility to the third party provider to be able to do all your disability management services for you, okay? You need to have process protocol within the organization itself that may well tap into that third party provider, but that third party provider needs to be able to tap into the organization. So just to go through them briefly, because I know you're all going to have this presentation to reflect back on afterwards, but the best practices of disability management programming, those 16 elements, divide out into 3 key categories. The first category being disability management policy and workplace resources, which encapsulates the joint worker management support and empowerment, responsibility, accountability, and authority, workplace culture and policy development, information and communication management, benefit design and influences, knowledge and skills of the disability management practitioner. What do all these elements mean? These first 6 elements mean that you need to have a process. It needs to be spelled out from A to Z. There needs to be people responsible for each step of the process. They need to know what their responsibilities are, and everyone in the organization needs to know who those respective players are. It needs to be delineated and it needs to be communicated. Best way to communicate it is, as we do in safety, having your standard operating procedures, have them available, but as well as that, we really encourage organizations to have a flow chart that takes you from the point of illness and injury to the point of return to work. That flow chart should be encompassing all injuries and illnesses, whether it be occupational or non-occupational, or you might want to have 2 separate flow charts, albeit you need to have something visible, you need to have something that's communicated, you need to have something that's accessible by all the people within the organization. Benefits, designs, and influences, those need to be taken in consideration as to, are they barriers to early intervention stay at work programming, or are they enablers to assist and support early intervention and return to work programming? Knowledge and skills of the disability management practitioner, okay? You need to have or should have a person or a number of people within your organization, albeit you might have an external provider doing disability management for you, you need to have someone in-house that has that responsibility of wearing that hat. Now, depending on the size of your organization, depending on the volume of illnesses and injuries in which you may push, that might be one person and that might be all they do, or that person might wear multiple hats, but there needs to be a person or number of people in your organization that have the knowledge, the wherewithal, and they champion your process. With regard to disability prevention, that's element number 2 within the 3 elements of best practices. Disability management not only looks at ill and injured people and helping them return to their highest level, success being back to your workplace, but an effective disability management program also leaps back into prevention. By tracking all the numbers of your illnesses and injuries in and outside of the workplace. By knowing all this information, you should and could and must start to look at preventative opportunities and mechanisms. So consequently, disability prevention looks at, do you have an accident prevention and safety process in place? I'm sure you all have JOSH committees. Do you have an occupational ergonomics program in place? Do you look at health promotion and wellness? Are you measuring and monitoring not only your occupational injuries, but your non-occupational injuries with regard to lost time patterns, injuries, and disabilities, and how they came about? Are you looking at your disability cost benefit data to measure and monitor as to where are the costs coming from? Where are the disabilities coming from? What can I do to prevent them? Now, I know a lot of people on the phone are going to go, well, gosh, you know, the WCB stuff, we can get that through our WCB portal. We can get that through WorkSafe BC. It's a phone call away, okay? It might be a bit more difficult to get your non-occupational stuff, but I'll be honest with you. You all have third-party providers in place. They're all tracking this stuff. They all have this stuff. You're not looking for individual claims costs. You're looking for aggregate costs. You're looking for the big picture with regard to where you can go and what you should put in place. So you're not flying blind, but rather you know that, okay, this is the cost drivers. Let's get ahead of this wave. Let's look at what we can do from a preventative perspective. That's what this element here, these, as I say, 5 elements within disability prevention look at. The final one, and these final 5 elements that fall under Division 3, if you will, is the early intervention and timely return to work process. Okay, so this is now looking at where the rubber hits the road, in the sense you've got a person, they've fallen ill or injured outside of the workplace or in the workplace. You know, it's been reported to WCB, your third-party provider has it, but as we mentioned earlier, one of the most critical stakeholders in the whole process is a supervisor, okay? It's your workplace. It's not the third-party provider's workplace. You've got skin in the game, your worker. You have a relationship with your worker. Your third-party provider doesn't. WCB doesn't, okay? This is where it gets personal, in the sense that whether you are doing it within your workplace or whether you have a third-party provider doing it, you can't just advocate responsibility out to the WCB or out to the third-party provider. We highly encourage and recommend that the organization themselves, in one shape, form, or another, stays in contact with that ill or injured worker. At the point of injury or illness, a conversation should ensue and modified work should be discussed. Now, again, we need to be aware of, if someone has suffered a catastrophic illness or injury, the last thing you're going to do is talk to them about coming back to work tomorrow morning. But you will talk to them about, do they need anything? Are they okay? Do they understand their benefits? Is there anything you can help them with? Keep them up to date with what's going on in the workplace. That communication, that personal touch. Now, if it's a non-catastrophic injury, where it's a minor injury, slip, trip, fall, where it's evident that, you know what, yeah, I think we have something here where we can keep you in the workplace because you're a valuable employee to us. We want to keep you in the workplace. Work is therapy. If someone is in the workplace, they are going to recover sooner than not being in the workplace for those minor injuries. Of course, for the catastrophic ones, those are somewhat different, okay? But for those catastrophic injuries, or for those instances where someone is away from the workplace needs to have conversations with them and keep them in the loop with regard to what's taking on in the workplace. Not talking about the injury per se itself, but talking about just everyday life, okay? Keeping that connection. So under early intervention and timely return to work processes, there should be processes in place. There should be packages in place. There should be information in place that's easily accessible and easily provided to the ill or injured worker themselves, whether that be in paper format, whether that be online, whether it be on a portal that you have within your workplace, whether it be through email, whether it be over the telephone. That's for you to decide within your organization as to what works best. But there needs to be process and protocols with regard to early intervention and worker communications. Who's doing what, where, when, and how? What's the third party provider doing? What are you doing? It needs to all fit together. Case management procedures, the return to work coordination. Where does a third party provider stop and where do you start? Or where do you start and where do they stop? Transitional work options. You know your workplace much better than the third party provider. You know what options exist. Have them all listed out. And finally, workplace accommodations, whether that be a temporary accommodation or whether that be a permanent accommodation. It's your workplace. You need to take a leadership role. So creating your own program. We've touched on this a little bit. Granted, I've only got 11 components listed here. And as you probably remember 2 seconds ago, I was talking about there are 16 elements that we feel are the best practice elements in a disability management program. Well, those 16 elements are rolled up into these 11 components that you should be aware of or cognizant of in creating and or enhancing your disability management program. And I should say that truly and simply in developing or creating or enhancing a disability management program, it's not easy, okay, but it's not super complex either. It's about just those baby steps. You know, the old adage, Rome wasn't created in a day. It's those baby steps of slowly moving down the road in that journey of creating and enhancing your particular process. And bear in mind that if you've got a small organization, you might be approaching it a bit differently. If you've got a very large organization with multiple sites, that's going to probably be a bit of a different approach. But at the end of the day, in one shape, form, or another, these 11 components, which encapsulate the 16 elements of best practice program, should be there in one shape, form, or another. And going right to number one here, back at the beginning, a disability management program should not be created in isolation. Okay, it shouldn't be created by one person in a back room that creates a standard operating procedure that they want to communicate out to the organization. It should be created by a committee. Okay, absolute best practices suggest that that committee should be a committee that's jointly created in some shape, form, or another with some management folks and some worker representation as well. And this is for a multitude of reasons. Number one, for acceptance, for buy-in, for awareness, but as well as that for insight. So you get your committee together, and within that committee, you should be creating certain documentation, certain protocols, such as your vision, mission, and objectives of what you want to do with your disability management program. Then you start looking at, okay, well, what's our process going to look like for occupational, non-occupational illnesses and injuries? What are all the respective people's roles and responsibilities? And from that, you create your flow charts, your guidelines, your brochures, your documents, your paper packages, your online packages, whatever may well work within your particular organization. You also select that champion. It might be one person, it might be 5 people. It might be one person wearing multiple hats. It might be 5 people wearing one hat. It really depends on your organization. But that's the person or persons that do most of the heavy lifting, whether it be in concert with your third-party provider or whether you have a complete internalized program. You also need to look at and evaluate the needs within your workplace. in the sense that your workplace is an individual workplace different from the other workplace down the road. What are your needs? Are you a one-site shop or are you multiple sites? Where are your injuries and illnesses coming from? What are your drivers? So you need to take that in, that look deep inside to see, okay, what do we need? Okay. And you might not be able to answer that entire question on day one, but it's a process that takes place over time. And again, as I mentioned earlier, establishing those policies and protocols. You need to have written, delineated process and protocols, and identifying the roles and responsibilities of the major players, developing a database. Now, in my world, a database can be as simple as an Excel document, or it can be as comprehensive as a software application, okay? Many organizations don't have the dollars, or in some cases, the volume to suggest that they go out and buy some software to look after their disability management needs. Many organizations start out, big, small, and in the middle, by utilizing Excel documents, which is quite fine, as long as you have somewhere to be able to measure, capture, and know who is off of work, when and where. You don't want anyone falling between the cracks. You want to be able to measure this process as well on an annual basis going forward. There are some critical elements that you do want to measure and monitor. And rather than get into that now, that's an exercise unto its own. More than happy to talk to you about it. Of course, on the occupational side, you do have access to the WCB portal. On the non-occupational side, as I mentioned earlier, if you've got third-party providers, they're probably tracking a lot of that. But you as an organization at the grassroots level should probably have an Excel document where you're capturing and tracking all your illnesses and injuries, whether it be occupational and or non-occupational in nature. You should also take a look at defining that hierarchy of return to work options in your workplace before need, okay? Looking at your workplace, identifying, hey, do I have a job jar? Do I have some transitional work options that may be readily available so that if someone gets hurt, ill, or injured in the workplace today, I'm not scrambling. I know that, hey, you hurt your ankle, you hurt your back, you hurt your knee. You know what? Yeah, you encountered a bit of violence in the workplace today. Yeah, tell you what, let's remove you from that situation and let's put you over in this situation here, which is a bit more of a protected situation, so you can get yourself back on your feet again. And through medical intervention and so on and so forth, we'll follow that guideline or the guiding that the medical industry gives us to get you back into your highest level possible, as opposed to letting the person drift off back to the home site. Milestones in the return to work process. What that incorporates is, again, coming back to that Excel document, knowing who's been off for how long, or who's been in a modified return to work plan for so long. Don't fall back on WorkSafe BC. Don't fall back on your third-party provider of managing the process. Again, they're very good resources. They're very good people. They're very good at doing what they do, but they are a resource to you and your workplace. Remember, it is your workplace. You need to monitor who is in modified return to work plans, who is in a permanent accommodation, because you need to track those things and follow up with them to make sure they're moving ahead, whether it be a temporary modified return to work or a temporary or graduated return to work plan. You want to be on top of it to make sure they're progressing. And if they're not progressing, where are the barriers? Ask the questions as to what's going on, get your third party involved, because now you've hit a barrier. And how do you overcome that barrier? With regard to permanent accommodations, you should, and it's highly encouraged, that you follow up on those permanent accommodations at least on an annual basis. And I say that to make sure that they're not incurring further illness or injury, or to ensure that you have them in the right place, the right job, the right function. Finally, developing return to work strategies, and we've talked about that. Measuring, monitoring, and improving your program. You always have to constantly be looking at it for constant enhancements and constant improvements because things change with time. Where are the injuries? Where are the cost drivers? And finally, developing that effective communication strategy. Because once you have all this great stuff in place, you want to make sure that your workplace knows about it. Now, there's a number of resources that are free right now to all employers in British Columbia. There's a grant through the provincial government that's available to 2025. Every employer in the province of British Columbia has an opportunity to go through a free workplace disability management assessment. There's a video that talks about it. There's further details on the NEDMAR website, but it's there for the taking. There's no downside. It's free. There's a number of other resources here, whether it be NEDMAR for education, Pacific Coast University for education. There's also the LO practice, Code of Practice in Disability Management, and the ISA guidelines in return to work, all available. And finally, questions and answers. So sorry if I took a bit longer, but I get very passionate about this.
Thank you so much, Bill. Excellent question. Does anybody have any questions for Bill at this point in time? Wow, your presentation was so thorough, Bill.
I was going to say, is anyone still there?
So look, I think there's some really, again, a lot of important stuff Bill covered in his presentation. And I think that, the whole disability management process that I've kind of I've dealt with in my former life it was always a complex process, and I think one of the winnable things was bringing people together and understanding policy and process. It tends to be the hook that we hang our clothes on at the end of the day that we can all resonate to. Having that sort of collaborative approach, is key. Disability management in our sector is really tough. And I recognize this. A lot of the stuff that we're doing is off the side of a lot of people's desks. And the primary responsibility has been, the delivery of services, operational responsibilities. However, in this day and age, again, health and safety is such a critical component and needs the respect and the support equally as operational services. So health and safety is going to be paramount in our sector in the upcoming decade. And there's no buts about it. And simply put, from a fiduciary perspective, with respect to claims management holistically, not just injured workers, but in disability management benefits in general, the costs are going up. And whether we like it or not, and there are a lot of drivers around those things. Can we address it all in its entirety? Probably not. But can we be impactful? Can we improve strategies and ways to manage this very important process? And our hope is through the association is to develop those tools for you and to provide some really critical information that can help you and to provide some context on how we can support you in the whole disability management component. Now, NEDMAR has some really excellent resources. I think some and most are at no cost. I would strongly urge to encourage you to contact Bill to access these services. They're very robust and have a really important positioning, I think, in helping organizations and pulling information and creating something that's very viable and supportive at the end of the day. And so I guess we have a question here for you, employer. Okay, so hello, when the employer has a third party and in-house person who is responsible for managing the disability claim, would you recommend that the disability committee to include the input of a third party or have meetings just within the three parties to understand where the gaps are? Excellent question. Very, very good question. And I think, I'll leave it to you, Bill, to respond.
You bet. Yeah, you know what? I recommend both. In a sense, initially, I would suggest you get together in-house, okay, and talk about your process, talk about the gaps, talk about any barriers and that sort of thing. Once you've had that in-house conversation with regard to your process the way it exists right now, then you can pull in the external third-party providers, okay? And in my world, the more people involved and the more communication, the better. So in essence, with your group, because I know most of you have a third-party provider for the non-OC and OC, you also have WCB. What I highly encourage organizations, have that small meeting just in-house, right, with your internal stakeholders, so that everyone feels comfortable to voice any kind of concerns or conversation or discussion. Based on how that goes, yeah, then bring in your third-party providers to sit down and talk about it as to, you know, this is where we're feeling gaps. This is where we're feeling barriers. This is where we have concerns. How can we work better together? Okay, because, you know, and this is a statement that a WCB director told me back in 1999. Okay, the employer needs to own the disability management process, not WorkSafe BC. So that goes over and above just WorkSafe BC, but all these third-party providers out there, they're coming in doing a service, but it's your organization. So I highly encourage you, have those meetings internally. Based on how those meetings go, invite your third party in.
No, I totally agree. However, you know, at the end of the day, and I know I hear this from many different perspective, is that the employer and the worker are driving the bus. The employer at the end of the day holds the, you know, the responsibility and needs to make sure that they're, you know, guiding the process. And that what that means is the third party benefit provider needs to meet your needs. It's not the other way around. And so I think there's some confusion around that. The other question is just around should there be a separate committee or one with OSH? In light of the way that things are working in the world, I would absorb or address that within the OSH committee. Why? Some of the things that are coming through and even the certification and recognition program structure is consistency in applying information and knowledge vis-a-vis through workers, employers, and management. So I would encourage that there not be a separate disability management committee, that it work within the confine of the OSH committee at this point in time. Unless you're a very large organization that has the resources and the capacities, for example, if you have a disability management coordinator or manager or something, but I would encourage you to keep it within that context.
Totally agree, Sat, in the sense the KISS principle, right? Keep it simple. Keep it simple, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you already got that Josh committee, which I'm sure 99.9999% of y'all do, then, you know.
Yeah. Well, everybody's speaking the same language at the end of the day. And it's critical that we understand what the context and the terms are. And that's the whole other thing, right? We don't want to mess those components up, keeping it sort of strategic and very clear. On that note, Bill, thank you. Any other questions for Stephen and for Bill? I know that we're looking at around almost 11:30. We did this by design to respect your time and, you know, give you some opportunities to reflect as well. And maybe just an earlier lunch as well, hopefully. And so I think we have another question here. We have a very small staff, only 10 to 12. We don't have much in place, not even an OSH committee as ED. This is overwhelming. Absolutely. And I think Stephen kind of can speak to this more than anybody. I think if you have less than 20 staff, you don't require
That is correct. So Sat's absolutely correct that if you have less than 20 workers, you do not need an occupational health and joint occupational health and safety committee. You just need a worker rep. So it would be someone who's designated to represent the employer. So a manager, perhaps even a supervisor, and then someone who represents the workers, a worker rep. And those individuals would then review the safety incidents, look at whether or not corrective actions are being put into place based on incident investigations, and also be able to help form what Bill referred to as some sort of job jar in the event that there is an injury, and you know the common types of injuries that occur in your workplace or certainly in your industry. what are the types of modified duties and alternate duties that are available. In a smaller organization, you may feel you don't have the same level of flexibility around those modified duties or alternate duties, but I would encourage you to be creative and look for those opportunities to keep that individual connected to the workplace, to keep them in a position where they can recover and work. There are ways to do it even in small organizations. It may take a little more work, being a little more creative, but those opportunities are there. The information that's available on NIDMAR, the information that's available on WorkSafe BC, I referenced one little starter kit for employers. Those are good places to start. And if your health and safety and prevention practices are in place, it gives you a good place to build off of. All of those things that are leading to preventing injuries are also then the things that you need to start considering with respect to supporting injured workers. Have we fixed the situation that resulted in the injury to begin with? Have we communicated those improvements or changes to that injured worker and put them at ease with respect to now trying to talk about a return to work program? And if we know the types of injuries that occur, we know the types of duties they will most likely have to avoid, what they're focusing on abilities, and getting them brought back into the workplace and keeping connected with the workplace. It's the same process for smaller employers, just a little less complexity to it all. It starts with the conversation with that injured worker. What do you think you can do if we were to bring you back tomorrow?
Thank you, Stephen. Again, excellent questions. On that note, if there are no more questions, again, we'd like to thank Bill and Stephen for their presentation. We'll make sure that this is posted and that you're notified. We'll also ensure that whomever participated, that there is a certificate of attendance. Upcoming, the association will be hosting another webinar on musculoskeletal injury prevention and road safety later this month. So we'll be probably getting that out to you probably next week or so on when that's going to happen specifically and the time. There'll be future webinars that will be happening as well. On another note, we're really excited about our annual general meeting that's coming up on June the 20th as well. You're welcome to visit our website for reference on that. And our website is being updated. So please be patient. We're trying to really get it together in the sense of just organizing it and keeping it updated. And so that will be something that I would encourage you to keep an eye on as well. A big thanks to Anna Mateos for her hard work, along with David Small, who's been running around in the background to make this all happen. Yes, thank you so much. Absolutely. To the point where, when I logged on, I actually had her name, and literally right before the session, she was able to, make the magic happen. And so thank you both for supporting us. On behalf of the association, we'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and express our gratitude to organizations, employers, and their staff for all the hard work and the dedication that they bring each and every day. Community social services is, an amazing, sector, and we're very grateful to you, and we encourage you to keep up the wonderful work. This concludes the webinar. We appreciate the time you spent with us this morning, and we wish you well, and thank you again for being a part of our session today. Thank you.